Hey guys, it's Robin, RsIslandCrafts, and welcome to my craft room. I've been cruising right along on Sophie's quilt for the Daniel's memory quilts. I went ahead and I got the whole thing done as a top. I kind of like the way it turned out. Can't see it very well, but I went ahead and I did a whole bunch of math, just trying to figure out exactly how to get these to sit right, to have them. I wasn't going for straight up and down, everything equal rows. I just wanted to make sure everything fit in there and it wasn't too far off balance. So what I did is I took the measurements of the back of the quilt and I separated it into 3 sections because I had 3 rows of t-shirts. So after I determined how many inches for each of my 3 rows, and I wanted to make sure that it was going to be divided up equally. Didn't matter what size these t-shirts were, that these were smaller and these were longer. I wanted to make sure that the actual 3 sections were going to be equal. And then for each row, I took that number and I divided it in half. So my rows ended up being 45 inches across, so divided in half. That gave me 22.5, so that I knew that this t-shirt block was going to have 22.5 inches, and then from top to bottom it ended up being 16.25. So I took my 22.5 inches, whatever the half of my row was here, and I subtracted out the actual width of my block, and that gave me how much to put on the border on each side. And then I did the same thing top to bottom. I took my 16.25, knowing that's how tall my actual row was, and since my block was 13.5 inches, I subtracted whatever my row was, I subtracted the height of my block, and then I divided that by 2, and I knew I would put a border on the top and the bottom. I hope that makes sense. It's kind of one of those things you work through as you're doing it. It's not one of those things you really read, and it's going to be different for everyone, but that's just the way that I figured it out. And then I decided after the whole top was done, I was going to put, I wanted to put 4.5-inch borders all the way around. I'd started with 5, and I decided that was going to be too much, so I was going to do 4.5. But I waited on the borders until I had this whole inside chunk done here. And then I decided that it was already pretty wide. But at the edge of this second row, there was only like 1 inch for each of these at the left and the right side of the row because of the size of having the 3 blocks there. So while the top was actually, the centerpiece was tall enough and wide enough, I knew I needed to have some type of a border because once I put the quilt together, I'm going to lose a little bit extra on those sides. So I decided to just go ahead and do I think I cut this fabric at 2 3/4 so that it'd have enough to stitch in for my seam here, my 1/4-inch seam, and then when I'm going to do that part where you lay the 2 pieces, the back and the top together, and then you flip them inside out because there won't be no batting for that. So I figured I'd just go ahead with 2 3/4 and then whatever's left is left. But I wanted it a little bit wider on the top and bottom because I didn't want it to end up being a square. So I went ahead with, I believe I already had these pieces cut at 4.5, so I just went ahead with the 4.5, and I put it there, and I put it there. And it ended up at a pretty good size. Now I'm going to set this aside now until I do all 3 tops, and then I'll worry about putting them together and, you know, deciding on how to actually quilt them. Because I want to do some type of quilting with the t-shirts, because from what I was reading that sometimes they still will separate from the interfacing on the back and they could get a little stretchy. So I want to make sure that they actually stay where they are. I might just do maybe I'll just stitch inside on the t-shirt and just make a little square that way, just to hold them in spot so they don't get too bad. And I don't know, maybe depending on the block, like I could always do a stitch right underneath Survivor. We'll see. But for now, I know most of my quilting is going to end up in this blue turquoisey color through here. So that's it. I was really surprised at how easy this went together when I wasn't trying to make sure everything was even and equal and you weren't sewing the t-shirts together. I wanted to make sure they just floated fluidly on top of the quilt like this, even though it's pieced. And some of the seams were only, I had to cut pieces that were 3/4 of an inch or 1.25 inches. I had a variety. I'm going to see if I'm going to put in a little picture here of the way I had my strips organized. But I think overall it worked out really well. So this is Sophie's quilt with all of her Uncle Daniel's t-shirts that she chose. So if you have any questions, go ahead and leave them down below. And this is actually like the first full-fledged t-shirt quilt I've ever made. I did want to show, for those who say that I have a really neat craft room, I was explaining in the comments one day that I'm a piler. I just kind of stack up. These are some special fabrics and some projects, and then I have all my different scraps and my little containers where I'm saving my thread ends and my yarn ends. And these are my soap making supplies. So yeah, they're all sitting on, I have 2 of those TV trays, the wooden TV stands, tables like that you have. So yeah, I just kind of like stack everything up. And here is my other wall of quilts. I really liked these quilts when I had them behind me in my video, so I wanted to make sure I still had them up somewhere. This is where I store my fabric. I keep it covered to keep the cats out of it and to keep dust. And once again, I have some scraps and some specialty fabrics up here, and these are all patterns. But that's it. That's Sophie's quilt. I hope you enjoy it. When I start working on, I'm not sure if I'm going to work on Emily's or Hunter. Emily has a quilt very similar to this where she has some background fabric and her t-shirts. Hunter only wants t-shirts, so all of his background fabric will actually be made out of t-shirts. So his might need to be more of an actual t-shirt quilt with the grids, but I'll see what those measure out, and I'll be sure to take you guys along for the ride. Thanks for hanging out with me. Bye!